Right. So today we're going to really dive deep into this whole Buy Canadian thing.
Yeah.
It seems to be everywhere these
It
days.
really does seem like it's everywhere you look these days.
So, we got a ton of articles and reports we've been looking through
Yeah.
to really try and get to the bottom of what's going on here.
Get a sense of like what's driving it,
Yeah.
and then also like what it all means
Yeah.
for Canada.
Exactly. So to kind of kick things off,
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that a lot of this renewed interest in buying Canadian seems to stem from all the trade tensions that have been going on globally.
Right.
I mean, if you think back a few years, it was the tariffs that the U.S. slapped on Canadian steel and aluminum.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, Canada's response with its own tariffs on American goods.
Yeah, and then it kind of kept escalating from there, right? I mean, then China comes in, they put tariffs on a bunch of different Canadian agri-food exports.
Right.
Like canola oil, peas, pork, seafood. It was a whole range of things.
It was a lot of stuff, yeah.
And that was because of Canada's tariffs on Chinese EVs, steel, and aluminum.
Yeah, and on top of all of that, I think you can't really ignore some of the rhetoric that was being thrown around back then. I
Yeah.
mean, when you start hearing talk of redrawing borders,
Yeah.
it's understandable that Canadians might get a little bit more, focused on supporting their own.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense, right? Like you start hearing stuff like that, and it's just natural to want to kind of circle the wagons a little bit.
Totally.
And focus on what you can control, which in this case is like supporting your local economy.
Absolutely. And I think we actually saw some evidence of that in the way that people's travel patterns changed.
Yeah.
There were reports that fewer Canadians were actually choosing to go down to the U.S. for their vacations.
Yeah. And that actually had a real knock-on effect for businesses down there. Like in some of those, tourist destinations that are really popular with Canadians.
There was one example I remember reading about that really stood out. It was this inn in Maine.
Oh, yeah.
Run by a guy named Sterling Morse.
Right.
And they were reportedly seeing just like a massive wave of cancellations from Canadian customers.
Yeah, like something like 90%. It was crazy.
Yeah, it was pretty wild, yeah.
But it makes you realize that all this trade stuff, it's not just like a theoretical thing. Like it has a real impact.
Oh, 100%, yeah. Like it trickles down.
Exactly.
And affects real businesses and real people's livelihood.
Yeah. So you've got this kind of, backdrop of uncertainty and, maybe a bit of this economic anxiety going on. And it's like in that environment that this Buy Canadian thing really starts to take hold.
It really does. It's almost like people like, okay, well, we're going to hunker down and support our own.
Right.
And we're seeing that play out both with consumers individually, but then also in how businesses are responding to this whole thing.
Yeah. Like it's interesting because it feels like this, almost like a wave of patriotism.
Yeah.
Like you hear about people making a real conscious effort to read labels.
Oh, totally.
And actively seek out products that are made here. Like it's, beyond just kind of like a passing thought. Like people are actually, putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's not just like a couple people doing this.
Yeah.
Like retailers are reporting actual increases in sales for stuff that's clearly marked as Canadian made.
Right. And I think you've got to give credit to social media for playing a role in all of this too. Like it's, places like Facebook where people are gathering and sharing information and like, kind of reinforcing this idea. Like there's this Facebook group called, I think it's Made in Canada, Canadian Products.
Yeah.
And it's got like over 1 million members.
Yeah, it's huge.
Which is crazy. Like that's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people who are engaged in this whole thing.
Right. And then obviously you've got the hashtags like hashtag Shop Local Canada.
Yeah.
Hashtag Made in Canada.
Yeah, totally.
So it's just like it's everywhere you look online.
And it's interesting because it's not just like, you and me sitting here talking about it or like people chatting about it online.
No.
Like there are actually tools that are popping up to help people really identify Canadian products.
Yeah.
Like there are apps now.
Yeah. There's like Scanada, Maple Scan. You can literally just like scan the barcode on something and it'll tell you like where it's from.
Yeah, it's crazy. And even like big retailers are getting in on this. Like Loblaws with their swap and shop thing.
Yeah.
And Rona has their Well Made Here campaign.
Right.
So it's like they're making it easier for people
to
actually make those choices if that's what they're looking for.
And I think that's really important because like, we can sit here and talk about buying Canadian, but it can actually get kind of tricky.
Oh, yeah.
When you actually start to like, try and figure out like what is actually Canadian.
Totally.
So these tools, these apps, these retailer programs,
Yeah.
they're kind of like that bridge
Yeah.
to actually helping people figure that out.
For sure. And businesses are obviously, they're not dumb.
Right.
Like, they're picking up on this.
Yeah, they're paying attention.
And we're starting to see some really, like clever marketing that really plays up the whole Canadian identity thing.
Yeah.
Like you've got Kickin' Horse Coffee with their Canadiano blend,
Yeah.
Black Diamond. They're advertising 0% American cheese on their cheese slices.
Right.
Even Moosehead got in on it with their presidential pack.
Yeah, and I love that.
It's funny.
But it's like it works. Right.
It only does.
Like it's tapping into that sense of like, national pride and people wanting to support their own.
Exactly. And the thing is, this whole Buy Canadian thing could actually have a pretty significant impact on the Canadian economy.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Bank of Montreal actually did a report on this.
They did.
And they suggested that it could potentially boost the Canadian economy by like $10 billion annually.
$10 billion? That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it could even lead to a noticeable bump in overall economic growth.
And that would be from people buying more Canadian products, obviously,
Yeah.
but then also the government like prioritizing Canadian businesses and their procurement.
Right.
And even just like more people traveling within Canada.
For sure. But I mean, there's always two sides to every coin.
Yeah.
And the BMO report did highlight some potential downsides too, right?
Yeah, they did.
Like
Right.
It's not like this is just like a guaranteed win-win for everybody.
Right.
So what were some of the caveats they mentioned?
Well, one thing is that, if everybody suddenly starts buying only Canadian stuff,
Yeah.
you might actually end up with less choice. Like there might not be the same variety available.
Right.
And then the other thing is that, if the focus gets too narrow, it could push prices up.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Like if there's less competition.
Right.
And then there's also this whole question of
Yeah.
like, what does Canadian even mean anymore? Like it's not as simple as it used to be.
No, it really isn't.
Like you take a company like Tim Hortons, like everybody thinks of them as Canadian.
Right.
But they're actually owned by a Brazilian company.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I think it is.
I mean, like, you still have your local Tim Hortons. That's owned by a Canadian franchisee.
Right.
But the big picture is a little bit more complicated.
Exactly. And then you've got other companies like Lululemon, which was founded in Canada,
Yeah.
but they're incorporated in the U.S. now.
Right. Or Roots, which is publicly traded.
Yeah.
But it's still considered a Canadian company.
So it's not always clear cut. Like it's not just about like where the company is headquartered anymore.
Yeah. It gets into this whole thing of like, where are things designed? Where are they actually manufactured?
Yeah.
Who owns what?
Right. And then even the labels can be confusing.
Totally.
Like product of Canada,
Yeah.
made in Canada,
Yeah.
imported by,
Right.
like those all mean different things.
Yeah. And to be honest, most people don't know the difference.
Yeah. And it's like product of Canada basically means like everything's from here.
Right.
Like the ingredients, the labor, everything. Made in Canada means like the final production happened here, but it could have parts from other places.
Yeah. And I think it's important to point out
Yeah.
that something can be labeled made in Canada and still have like 49% foreign content.
Right. Which is kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really shows you how interconnected
Yeah.
global supply chains actually are.
Totally.
It's hard to untangle it all.
It is. And it kind of raises this question, right, of like, what about those companies that are foreign-owned, but they're manufacturing stuff here in Canada?
Yeah.
Like, are you supporting the Buy Canadian thing
Yeah.
if you're buying their products? Like, it's a tough one.
Yeah. That's a tough one.
Like, on the one hand, they're employing Canadians. They're
Right.
contributing to our economy.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, like, the profits are going back to, wherever the head office is.
Right. It's not a simple answer.
No, it's not. And then there's also the whole, like, unintended consequences thing to think about.
Oh, for sure.
Like, what happens if people start boycotting, say, like, a big American brand?
Yeah.
Like, what about all the Canadian franchises of that brand?
Right.
Like, those are Canadian businesses. They're employing Canadians.
Totally.
And they might even be selling some Canadian-made products in their stores.
Exactly.
So it's like you could end up hurting Canadians by trying to support Canadian businesses. It's a complex issue, yeah.
It is.
And we're seeing that complexity play out
Yeah.
in how governments are approaching this whole thing.
Yeah.
Like you've got the Saskatchewan NDP, they're proposing a buy local day,
Right.
which is, it's a symbolic thing,
Yeah.
but it raises awareness
Yeah.
and gets people thinking about it.
And then you've got the Saskatchewan government talking about how they're awarding, a huge chunk of their procurement contracts to Saskatchewan and Canadian companies.
Right.
So that's like them actually putting it into practice
Yeah.
with their own spending.
For sure, for sure. And then you've got municipalities getting involved too.
Yeah.
Like Markham, they've adopted a buy Canadian procurement strategy,
Right.
but they've also been smart about it and built in some flexibility because they recognize that sometimes you just can't get what you need
Right.
entirely from within Canada.
Yeah. And they're also trying to stay compliant with all the trade agreements and stuff.
Right.
It's a balancing act.
It is. And then you've got Timmins, which is, up north.
Uh-huh.
They're like all in on buying Canadian where possible.
Yeah.
And they're even asking for what they're calling flag reports
Yeah.
when something has to be sourced from outside of Canada.
Right. So that's all about transparency.
Exactly.
Like they're not trying to hide anything. They're just saying, look, this is why we had to do this.
Yeah. And then Carleton Place is kind of doing a similar thing. Like
Okay.
they're all about buy Canadian for their day-to-day purchases.
Wow.
And they've changed their procurement policies
Yeah.
to favor Canadian companies for mid-level spending.
Okay.
But they're also being realistic about the cost implications,
Right.
especially for like big infrastructure projects.
Yeah.
Because sometimes going all Canadian can get really expensive.
Totally.
Well-
So, when you look at all of this,
Yeah.
it makes you wonder if this buy Canadian thing
Right.
is just like a knee-jerk reaction
Yeah.
to all those trade disputes we were talking about earlier.
Right. Like a bit of that economic defiance,
Yeah.
like sticking it to the man kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Or if it's something that's actually going to stick around
Right.
and become a more permanent part
Yeah.
of how Canadians think about their buying habits.
That is the question, isn't it? And it's a good one.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting is that, remember that Made in Canada Facebook group we were talking about?
Yeah.
Like that was around before all this trade stuff blew up.
Yeah, that's true.
So it suggests that there was already like an underlying preference there
Yeah.
for Canadian made stuff.
Right. It's like it's been bubbling under the surface and then
so-
all this stuff just kind of like brought it to the forefront.
Yeah, yeah.
But, one thing that I think is really interesting is that this could be a real opportunity
Right.
for Canada to build some long-term economic resilience.
Yeah.
Like if we can actually start to reduce our reliance on all these foreign markets, that could be really unstable.
Yeah.
That could be a good thing for our economy in the long run.
It could. It could. And it could create more jobs here.
Right.
And, just generally make things more stable.
Absolutely. But, we do have to acknowledge the challenges too.
Of course. Yeah.
Like cost is always going to be a factor.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's just straight up hard to find Canadian-made alternatives
Oh,
for certain products.
right.
So it's not like this is a simple solution.
No, it's not a magic bullet.
So to kind of wrap all of this up,
Yeah.
I think what we're seeing here is that the buy Canadian movement is definitely a thing. It's not just some passing fad.
It's real.
Yeah. It's being driven by those trade tensions that we
Right.
talked about. And I think also just this growing sense of economic nationalism that we're seeing around the world. And it's affecting how people shop,
Right.
how businesses are marketing their products,
Yeah.
and even how governments are doing business.
Exactly. And even though figuring out what Canadian even means
Yeah,
is getting harder and harder.
it is.
And there are definitely still challenges when it comes to cost and availability. Like, I think there's a real desire amongst Canadians to support the Canadian economy.
Totally. It leaves you with something to think about, right?
Yeah.
Like, as the world changes,
Yeah.
is this buy Canadian thing going to stick around?
Right.
Like, is it going to have a lasting impact on the economy and on our identity as Canadians?
Yeah, I think that's a question that's worth pondering.
Yeah. So for all of you listening out there, that's something to chew on.
Food for thought.
Exactly.